Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm Robin Eissler. I'm the CEO and founder of BoosterHub, a software platform made for booster clubs. Tonight, we're going to talk about booster club budgeting. Budgeting is so important to a booster club because it's really how you decide to spend the money. And if you have a good budgeting process set up, then you don't have any issues on how you're going to spend the money or anybody asking for a check or something that's not in the budget. You've got a plan for that from the start. So we're going to dive into that tonight. Before we get started, I've opened up the webinar chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll answer those as we go along. If you have an opportunity, go ahead in there and drop your name and your booster club and where you're from so everyone can know who's attending tonight. And feel free to collaborate with each other there in the chat while I'm doing the presentation. We'll go ahead and get started. So one of the great things that you can do in our webinars is you have the opportunity to collaborate with other boosters. And so it's one of the few opportunities that you get to ask questions in an environment where people who are doing the same thing that you're doing are, and you can share best practices and see what they're doing. So please feel free to have those conversations in the chat during the webinar. If you have any questions, you can put them in there, and then we'll have a special offer at the end, both for our current subscribers and for anyone who's not currently on BoosterHub. Welcome, Daniel Boone, Mary Butler from Daniel Boone in Gray, Tennessee. Nice to have you. Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to try to do both, monitor the chat and do the webinar, so sometimes it gets a little crazy. So we'll dive in here. So tonight we're going to talk about why budgets are the foundation of any good booster club, who should be involved in the process, what tools to use, when you should budget, what the process should look like, how much you should budget, how you should do your approvals and use the budget, and then insights that you can gain from last year's budget and such. Great. I love seeing everybody in the chat there. Welcome to everyone. Thanks for joining us. It looks like we've got a good group from across the country. So one of the things that I hate to hear is people say, we don't have a budget. We just write checks when the coach asks or the band director asks. And this is just frightening. It's frightening for a lot of different reasons. One, if you don't have a budget, how do you know how much to fundraise? How do you know how much you're going to spend? If you're just doing this check on demand all the time, yeah, maybe your booster club's been successful and you've got a lot of money in the bank, but you still don't know if you're going to have the money to do the necessities, the required things. And so it's really important to get a budget in place before your season starts. Make sure you have a plan. And that doesn't mean you can't have flexibility. So if you do want to give your program director, whether it's a coach or band director or choir director, some flexibility, you can budget that in, and we'll talk about how to do some of that. So the budget really is the foundation of all the financial operations in your booster club. It's the roadmap for the organization and says, okay, we've agreed to spend $50,000 this year. That means us as the booster club are going to have to raise $50,000 or the difference between that and what we already have in the bank. So it's really your game plan and your promise to your organization, your students, and your community. This is what we're going to try to accomplish this year. Now, budgets don't always happen, right? They're a guesstimate. A good example of that was 2020 when COVID hit. My personal booster club that I was running at the time, we had a plan for a big budget that year. And I called an emergency meeting and I said, we've got to take our fundraising budget to zero and plan for no fundraising this year. And we did have a little bit of money in the bank, but we went ahead and adjusted our tournament schedule. We adjusted the things we were going to spend money on. Ironically, it ended up being our best fundraising year ever, but but you have to have that. And if you have the game plan and the promise in place, it's easy to make those adjustments when things come your way, unexpected things. The budget also sets a really good foundation for your accounting practices. One of the reasons it does this is because at the beginning of the year, you have to talk about, well, what kind of categories are we going to put this money in? And what things are we going to look at to determine how we set our fees, how we price our concessions, all of those sort of things. And so if you're working through a full budgeting process, it's going to set up the structure for all of your finances along the way. So it's a really good practice to do that. And then you're going to know, hey, what should we have in our chart of accounts in our accounting system? Well, if you've done your job on the budget, you're already going to have that information. It also helps avoid those pitfalls. Even today, I think a couple folks' questions for the webinar were, how do you say no to a director that's asking for money? And it's real simple. If it's not in the budget, then the only way that money can be spent is from a vote from the entire booster club. And if you set that practice, and that's the practice that your board and your booster club follows, it's really easy to deal with those questionable expenses that pop up. And sometimes they're good expenses. Hey, we won something, we're going to nationals, we need to spend extra money. That's great. Let's go ahead and do it. And sometimes it's somebody who's maybe taken advantage of the booster club over several years and just keeps asking for money. And now if you have that budget in place, you can just refer back to the budget. It's not political, it's not emotional. It's very simple. This is what we've agreed to do, and here's the money that's going to be spent. And if there's something outside of that, then you can have a vote and adjust the budget if needed. Again, as we just talked about, it simplifies your decision making. So once you establish the budget, you have that framework, and then anything outside of that framework is going to need a vote. There's a few cases, some booster clubs will have, oh, if it's an expense less than $500, then we don't need, full approval or revision of the budget. But even that, you have to be careful, because if you have repeated requests over and over again for $500, that adds up quickly. And really, the last reason the budget's so important is a lot of times in a booster club, budget or budget versus actual is the only financial report that you'll receive as a board member or a member of the booster club. Most booster clubs don't produce a series of financial statements, maybe a treasurer's report. So then the budget becomes the actual accounting and financial document of the organization. So that's another reason it's so important with booster clubs. When you're walking through the budgeting process, there's quite a few people who should be involved. So generally, your board or your executive board should draft the budget. And during that process, they should meet with the coach or the director and talk about the needs for the season, how much is going to be needed, how much do we have in the bank, is there any equipment that's required this year? Are we working on any big capital projects, like maybe a band is buying a semi-trailer, or an athletics program is buying a scoreboard. So you want to get that information to start with. And then the executive board should be talking about a plan to get it done. It's great to say, hey, we need $75,000, but if we don't have a plan on how to raise that money, it doesn't do you very good to put it in the budget. So really, the executive board should be talking about, well, we're going to have 3 fundraisers, and this one will be 60% of that amount, this one should be 20%, etc. You're also going to want to consult your school district, perhaps your school district CFO or school business officer, and determine what's required. So a lot of school districts will require specific financial information that they want from the booster club at least once or twice a year. And so when you're setting up your budget, you can go ahead and put those requirements in there. Then you don't have to worry about later on, or take a list of this financial information and turn it into this. If you start with the end in mind, you'll have that information ready to go. You will talk with your booster club members. So if you've only got 10 people participating this year, it's going to be a lot harder to raise $100,000 than if we have 100 people participating. So you'll want to consult your membership and explain what needs to be done, make sure that there's engagement to get that done. And then also usually previous board members. So a lot of times people say, well, we don't know where to start. We've never done this. And if your program's never had a budget before, your best resource is going to be either your previous year's accounting, if you have some, or a previous board member who can say, we spent this much last year, we bought this much last year, and you can find out what you've done in the past. And generally, year over year, booster clubs tend to follow what they did in years past. We see budgets done a lot of different ways, depending on the size of the club and the resources. So some people just keep a paper journal and put the numbers in there, and that's easy. It's a little time intensive and it's easy to make errors. More commonly, we see spreadsheets, a Google Sheet or an Excel. It's easy to set up. It gets a little more complicated as the season goes on, particularly if you have any type of transaction volume. Once you get over about 100 entries, that starts to get difficult. And then a lot of booster clubs now are using some sort of accounting software. So whether it's QuickBooks or one of the other tools, or BoosterHub's got a full accounting suite. It sometimes takes you a little longer to set that up at the beginning of the year, but then it's much easier going forward because it's all automated. And then some boosters who particularly are using a spreadsheet or the paper journal, that budget is the only financial document that they have. So as we've talked about, that's like your live ledger where you're adding things and subtracting things. I don't recommend that, but sometimes that's what happens, and that's what we see. And if you're doing that, that may just be the way that it needs to be done. So here we go again. We don't have a budget. We just write checks when the coach asks. The other thing that concerns me is it raises the question of potential fraud. So if you don't have a plan and you don't know where all the money is going to be spent, then you can't say, "Hey, wait a second. We were supposed to spend 22,000 on this and it was 42,000." You don't have some of those checks and balances that help keep a lookout for potential misuse of funds in a booster club. And while I would like to say that doesn't happen, we do see about a half a dozen cases a year of fraud and theft in a booster club. And generally, it comes from higher up, one of the board members who has access to the financial information. So the budget really helps protect against that and gives the whole booster club a contract that this is what we're working with, and some checks and balances to know that's where things actually got spent. So when to draft your budget, you'll want to draft it generally at the end of your fiscal year. So some programs end in December, some end in June, and there are some that end at other times. So 1 to 2 months before your year's ending, you want to start drafting next year's budget. Then you've got a really good idea of what you spent this year, and you can start mapping it out for what you want to do next year, and then have a month or so to revise it and get it approved so that by the time the year starts, you've got a fresh budget and you're ready to go. I recommend drafting the budget with a small team. This is not something that you want to do in an all-member meeting with 50 or 100 people in the room, because that will cause chaos and everybody will want to have input. And so you'll want to keep this mostly to the board or the executive board and the people that have met with all those stakeholders, and then draft the budget. And then you want to present it out to your membership as a whole. All your members should be invited. Hey, this is our annual budget approval, should be a public meeting, and the budget should be approved. I do recommend that if you do make changes to the budget, that you revise it and make an amended version and then get that approved. So you have, again, a series of checks and balances. We decided to spend an extra $25,000. Here's the amendment one. It's been approved, and you've got that paper trail showing your budgets, and what has changed and when they were approved, and how many people were there. That, again, just stops any issues that could arise from spending more or less in certain places. So when you start the process, one of the things that I like to do is start with the end in mind. How much money do we need to raise? How much do we need to get into our program? And how much of that is going to come from fundraising? Perhaps it's concessions. How much of that's going to come from membership dues? Or maybe you sell merchandise, or you have a couple large fundraisers every year. So you'll want to plan that out, start with the end and work backwards. I also recommend to keep the budget itself fairly simple. So for example, if you're selling merchandise, you don't want in the budget the individual products that you're selling. That should maybe be in a separate sales report that identifies how many t-shirts we sold and hats we sold, and yard signs we sold. But in your budget, it's just under merchandise. If you're a very, very small club and you have just a few things that you sell every year, it may be okay to put those in as line items in your budget. So it's really for you to determine, but you want to try to keep it as simple as you can. You want to follow the guidelines. Again, your school district or your association or even your state may have some requirements for financial reporting. So you'll want to make sure that you're considering those. And then finally, you'll want to ask questions. How much did we spend last year? Was that enough? Do we need more? Can we reduce the cost per student? And how could we do that? What are some other areas that we could offset? So it's really important to take some time, maybe a week or two to go through this process and determine what the actual figures should be. Again, when we talk about the structure, we want to talk about what's required, so what the program needs to achieve its goals for the next year. You want to think about what questions people are going to ask. So as you go throughout your Booster Club year, are people going to ask, why does it cost this much to have my son in this program? Or how much did we raise in that fundraiser? Or perhaps questions like, you're in a big marching band, but you have color guard fundraisers and concert band fundraisers. Or you're in an athletic booster club and you might have different programs, perhaps football and volleyball and soccer. So you need to think about what buckets that you have as you structure your budget to determine, do we need to make some subcategories to put things in to track those funds? And then again, think about how detailed you want it to be. My recommendation on the general budget is to keep it pretty high level and then use some other reporting if you need to get into real details on certain products or fundraisers or things like that. Again, if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and we'll talk about those. So this is a very simple budget. I pulled this online from a school district out in California. And it's just some basic information, the income, the expenses, and the ending balance. And you can see it's got just a list of things. And you can see here it's starting to get into some details on the fundraisers. You can see that they've got fundraising expenses to offset those, so we can see if those were profitable, and some of the detailed spending. And you may be spending so much that you really need to start grouping those expenses into buckets too. So you just need to think about, sometimes you'll see uniforms, equipment, supplies. Those might all be grouped under one thing, program expenses, in your budget. So just think about what you want to see, what you want to present, and again, the questions that people are going to ask. So if you start with the end in mind, generally speaking, if you're a booster club, you are a nonprofit. And if you're earning less than $50,000 a year in your revenue, this is your tax return. So these are the requirements. You need to put in your organization information that you're still in business and whether or not you raise $50,000 or less. So that's probably not a good guide for what to put in your budget. If you're raising more than 50,000 and less than 200,000, you're going to use the 990EZ form. So we'll go ahead and look at that. And this is what the 990EZ tax return looks like. Now, I think that if this is what you have to fill out at the end of the year, it would help to start your budget to look something like this, so that you've already got your buckets defined. Now, you don't have to do this. You could make it more like the first one, but then at the end of the year, either you or your accountant are going to have to go through and determine what everything is. So it basically breaks down to contributions and program service revenue, membership dues. There's some other things that most booster clubs don't have, but then you'll have fundraising, and there's two different categories of fundraising, gaming and non-gaming, as you'll see over here. And then you've got merchandise sold and other income, and the expenses go through a similar process. So in BoosterHub, if you open a BoosterHub account and you open our accounting tool, you're going to get a default chart of accounts that looks pretty darn similar to this 990 tax return. And then we're going to kind of force you to work in those buckets. And that's so at the end of the year, you don't have to do a lot of work. You kind of know where that money's going, you know how it's categorized, and you can easily translate your financials into what's needed for the tax return. So we've broken down things like fundraising needs to be broken down into gaming and non-gaming. What's the difference? One of them requires a gambling license generally from your state. So if you're doing raffles or 50/50s or things like that, you may need to classify some of your fundraising income in that category. So this is just a great default chart of accounts to work from. You can customize it and get into detailed sub accounts. Again, as detailed as you want to go. And so a lot of that depends on your program and depends on how much you want to show in the budget itself. So when I talk about buckets, I'm really talking about the chart of accounts. So if you've set up your budget right and you're working with an accounting system, not just a spreadsheet, and even just a spreadsheet, you're going to want to just create these buckets that everything's going to go in. Generally, in a booster club, your income's going to be either program income, and that would be something like band fees, the fees to participate, or um, sports fees. General donations, so these are things that might come in like sponsorships or general donations to your program. Fundraising is usually associated with an activity. So you may have an event or sell something to raise funds. One of the differences usually between donations and fundraising is that fundraising usually has a cost, whereas donations typically don't have a cost associated. You usually have concessions, which is a category under fundraising, and then merchandise as well. And then in your expenses, your big expenses are going to be your programs. This is why your booster club exists. It exists to support your program. So most of your expenses should be in your program category. And then you'll have fundraising. And if you're running concessions, you'll have some expenses, merchandise. And then there's other expenses, things like rent, utilities, mailing, printing, things like that. You're going to want to follow those buckets as you set your budget up. If you're, again, you may want to break things down further in a secondary report. So, again, merchandise or concessions, or sometimes you want to see what actually sold. The budget really isn't the place for that. So, you want to think about making a secondary report. And then you want to think about what questions will be asked. So generally, the first question is, why does it cost this much? Or how much does it cost per student to do this program? So you want to be thinking about that. How much money did we raise? Whenever you do a fundraiser, that's the first question people have. They want to know how much money was raised. How much did we spend? So that did we cover our expenses this year? Did that fundraiser cost more or less than we anticipated? And then, hey, we just got we won the state semifinals. Now we're going to go to the state finals. That wasn't expected. Can we afford that item or that trip? And so you want to be thinking about that as you're going through the process. And I see, Mike, yes, we do have this recorded. We'll be sending out a link to all of you after the webinar, so you can have a link to it, and it'll also be posted on our YouTube channel. So when you start looking at the questions and you go, okay, well, let's start with that basic chart of accounts. How much does it cost per student? How much money did we raise? How much did we spend? Or can we afford a trip? This particular list is not going to give you all those answers. So let's jump to one that's a little more detailed. Did we make money selling merchandise? Do we need to change the prices at concession? How much profit did we make on the spring fundraiser? Could we lower our program fees? Then you start to have a little bit more detailed. So now I can see our spring fundraiser here, the things associated with it, and our spring fundraiser expenses. So this is probably about the level of detail that you want in your budget, so that you can start to answer questions just by looking at the budget. And now, as we talked about, if you're in a larger program and you have the whole program, and then you have sort of sub programs in there, so a marching band, color guard, concert band, then you start to have bigger, more questions. Did we cover the cost of the color guard uniforms? Did the marching band raise enough money to cover the trip? Does the concert band have any funds left from last year? And so you've got more buckets, right? Because you have the booster club buckets, but now we have marching band buckets and we have color guard buckets and we have concert band buckets. And you're going to want that to look more along the lines of something like this. So you've got your main budget, and then you can have a sub budget for each different category. Let me go back here so you can see you've got your marching band, your color guard, your concert band, and this is where you could get your program fees have been paid and the expenses for that specific program. And that's going to help you make better decisions, certainly coming in the following year, because you'll be able to see, well, marching band did well, it covered its expenses, but the color guard did not. So maybe we need to readjust the color guard fees. So again, a big part of going through the budgeting process is thinking about the decisions that you're going to make and how you want to see that information. There is no right or wrong answer. So I have seen clubs that take this information, marching band, color guard, and concert band, and put it over here in the chart of accounts. So we'll have fees, and then under fees, we'll have marching band fees, color guard fees, concert band fees, which is a great way to do it. It makes it a little harder to get a whole program view, which establishing these columns like this allows you to get a whole program view. Whereas if you make it in the chart of accounts, you have to do it line by line. So it gets a little more complicated. Just going to grab a drink of water here. And this is just a different type of program. Same thing. If you have a fall fundraiser or a festival or a banquet and you want to see, hey, did that particular event or program that we put on, did it make money? You can break it down like this. So, for example, if you're a theater program and you have different shows, you may want to make these columns your fall show, your winter show, your spring show, etc. And then you just have one line for entry fees or costumes or props or things like that. So again, it's really up to you in your program and how you want to structure the budget and make it look. And again, as we talked about, we don't have a budget. We just write checks. That's pretty scary. That leaves a lot of room for fraud. So I just wanted to put one more reminder up there with our little guy. So let's talk about how much to budget. So what's needed? We talked about starting at the end and working backwards. So the best place to do that is if you're lucky, your program had a budget from last year and has an income statement from last year, and you can see how much revenue came in and how much was spent. And if you have that, it's pretty easy. You can adjust, we think we'll do a little better this year or a little worse, and you can easily make your budget. If you don't have that, your bank account is usually a good place to go, and you can kind of see what came in and out, or go back to those previous board members or your coach or your director to get that information. One thing I recommend is don't set your budget to spend everything that comes in. So you should always have a surplus in your budget. And so if you're planning to spend 50,000 next year, then my recommendation is that you try to raise 55,000 or 57,000 and build in some contingency there. So that's one of the things that I see a lot is people say, we have to spend everything that we make. We have to, it's a nonprofit. Everything that comes in has to go out. And that's not true. It can roll over to the next year, and it's helpful to start building a contingency fund. So when I took over my booster club, we did not have enough money in the bank to pay the deposits for our fall event. So we had to either front that money or try to fundraise right at the beginning of the season, which is kind of hard, and to get those deposits in place for our initial season events. By the end of the year, we built a reserve so that going into the next year, we had the cash we needed to do those things. And so be sure not to set the budget to zero. Build in some contingency there. If you do have a big capital project, something that's spanning several years, you're raising money for a big piece of equipment or a big trip, you'll want to put that in the budget for the amount that you're going to raise this year. So if you're going to a big tournament or the Macy's parade or something like that, and you're trying to raise 100,000 over 2 years, then this year's budget should have $50,000 in it to account for that. Budgets for booster clubs are generally on a cash basis. And so even those capital projects are going across several years, you want to make sure that you account for the amount that you need this year. And don't forget ordinary expenses. So you're going to have your website hosting, you're going to have your software fees or transaction fees or printing, mailing. We don't see as much as that anymore, but you still have some of it. Maybe you have to have a CPA do your taxes at the end of the year. You want to make sure that you try to remember all those costs. If you've got the historical information, you should have it. If you're starting from scratch, you may just want to put a blanket amount in there. And then if you really have no idea, just guess. Generally speaking, this is about how much I think we'll do. And then you have a baseline for next year. You'll get better as you go along, I promise. All right, I'm going to switch over and show you. We'll just dive in a little bit here. I'm going to move this over to this screen. Bear with me just a moment. See if I can do this properly. Okay, so we're going to do just a little live budgeting tonight. So this is actually, we're inside of BoosterHub. This is our accounting dashboard. And in our accounting system in BoosterHub, the budget is just a view of what's happening. So it's a specific point in, it's a specific report in the system. So we'll go over here to budgets. And when we want to create a new budget, we'll just click new budget and we'll call this our 2026 annual budget. And a budget is just a view of what's happened over a period of dates. So a lot of times people say, oh, I need to get this transaction into the budget. It's not going to be in the budget. If the transaction happens between these dates, it's already in the budget. So you don't need to worry about that. The budget just views the data that's coming in and out of the accounting system. And so we'll save this, and now we have this new budget. And then we can just go down through. So again, we start with that chart of account that's similar to what the tax return is going to require. And we'll say, well, maybe we're going to sell 5,000 in fan packages and we're going to do 10,000 in sponsorships. And you can see here it's already telling me, whoa, we're behind on fan packages. So it's calculating that live, and we'll put 5,000 in here. And then we're going to collect some banquet money, some tickets. So we'll put some money in there. Our team meals, maybe we collect money for those as well. Uniform fees, we'll maybe put something in there. And then you can just go through each line item and enter that information. You can see here the system already has some data in it, so it's already calculating that information. And then we can put in our expenses. Then in BoosterHub, what we actually have you do is you can save this budget as a draft. So it's telling me this one is a draft. But I can also save and approve it. Once I save and approve this budget, it can't be changed. And so that goes back to those checks and balances where we don't let people just go in and say, well, I want to make this 6,000, we're going to spend extra there. So once I save and approve this budget, it is now fixed, and I can no longer edit those budget fields because this is an approved budget. If you do need to amend it, you can duplicate it and then make your amendment, so you don't have to start over. And then if you decide, okay, this is the information that we're looking for, but we'd like to get a little more detailed under our programs, then you go over to your chart of accounts and you can create a new account. So perhaps under programs, we want to look at tournament dues or something like that. So we'll just say that that's an income account, and that's a sub account under our programs. And now I've got that line item there that will now show up in my budget. So that's how we do the budgeting process in BoosterHub. It's really easy. And then in your main reporting, it becomes your default report, your current budget versus actual. And it's going to show you the budgeted amount, the actual amount, and where you are according to that particular budget number. When we talked about those categories and different buckets, this is what we have in our Pro Accounting and Booster Hub is that you can see we have these columns for those different programs. So you can start to break your budget down into the different sports or activities in your program, and you can see your actual numbers there as well. So we call that our detailed view on our budget. If you've never had a chance to come in and take a look at our accounting tool, it's really awesome. This is our new one that we just launched. We just brought in transactions live from the bank, so you can have that there. And then we just launched our debit card program to help you manage your expenses. So it's really exciting, a lot of fun. So we're going to go back over to the PowerPoint here. And let's see here. We're going to go back to full screen. Okay, great. So the best way to use your budget effectively is you're going to want to review it at your monthly meetings. That budget versus actual report's a great one to use. And you can see, are you tracking towards your budget numbers? Are you too much or too little? One of the things you'll want to keep in mind, you may want to make some shorter period budgets. So you may have an annual budget, but then perhaps maybe you raise most of your money in August. Then you may want to make a sub budget that's just August, and you can see if you're meeting your August expectations. So maybe your annual budget runs the whole time, but your fundraising or your expenses all come in a different period. You may want to make a sub budget for just that period to make sure you're tracking towards what you're anticipating. If you do see something that's way off, discuss and make adjustments. Watch out for those surprises and red flags, and then make an amendment if needed. If you see, okay, we're spending way more than we agreed, so we need to either change what we're doing or adjust things, or perhaps you're having a great fundraising season, and hey, we've got some extra money. Is there anything we'd like to add to the budget for this year? And then at the end of the year, you want to go back and say, hey, was our budget accurate? Did we get pretty close? Do we need more details in any area? Perhaps your buckets were just too big and they didn't give you the detail that you needed as you were going through the year. And then finally, are there large factors that will change in the next year? Do you have a big group of students moving in? Do you have a big group of students moving out? Or do you have sponsors that could be at risk, or new sponsor potentials or things like that? Or, hey, we haven't bought new band uniforms in 10 years. It's time to buy band uniforms. We need to consider how to do that next year. And then finally, you want to take your budget and use it for analytics. And a lot of times this is really helpful to present at the beginning and the end of the year in your booster club meetings, because people, when they see the numbers and you say, hey, how much does it cost per student for our program? When we can say, hey, it costs $1,200 per student to do the program that we did last year. So when you kick off your fundraising for the next year, then people go, oh, that's right, it costs $1,200 per student. We better get in there and help fundraise. A lot of times people want to know what percentage was driven by fundraising versus fees. So some booster clubs charge fees for the students to participate, and some fundraise and some do a mix. And so if you gather some analytics, you can say, hey, we offset 50% of the cost through fundraising this year. Next year we're trying to get to 55%. You can pull those analytics from your budget and really help engage your community and get them excited for your program. And then things like, what are your margins on merchandise? We see this a lot. People don't make money on spiritware or merchandise. And so it's helpful to have those numbers in the budget to see what they really are. Same with concessions. You want to be careful there and make sure that everything you're buying, you're selling, it's some kind of margin that makes sense. So you want to have those types of analytics that you can pull from your budget at the end of the year. So just to recap, budgets really are the key to success. They help prevent some of those uncomfortable situations where everybody's trying to decide, should we spend that or not? You'll want to have all your stakeholders invited during the budgeting process. And one thing that helps is later on, um, those stakeholders can't come back and say, well, we need this money all of a sudden because they were invited to the budgeting process. They participated. And so you can kind of hold them accountable and say, hey, you didn't get that in at the beginning of the season. We didn't budget for it. You want to use good tools. I'm a little partial to BoosterHub, but there's a lot of great tools out there. You'll want to budget prior to the start of the year so there's no questions asked. You don't get in the heat of the moment. Let's spend money on this. Ask questions and keep it simple. Start with the end in mind. Review it often and then use your budget to provide insights back to your community so that you can help increase engagement and fundraising. So what I really like to see is we have a budget. We know what the students need and how much it'll cost, and we know how we're going to raise the money for this year. That's a really great booster club that's healthy and run well, and you're not going to have any surprises during the year. Well, budget surprises during the year. You may have other surprises, but that's one way that you've got your club running and it's running well and healthy. That's the end of the presentation for tonight. If you're not a BoosterHub subscriber, we do have a coupon tonight, a QR code for $50 off your annual subscription. If you are a subscriber, if you'd like to refer somebody, you can send them this link and we will give them the discount and then donate $50 to your club. So please share. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at boosterhub.com. We've got a great Booster Club Academy there that walks through all kinds of training for Booster Club officers and members. And then we have our support center. You can reach out to us on the contact us form, and we're happy to answer questions. They don't need to be Booster Hub related. If you've got an issue or something brewing in your Booster Club and you just like some feedback, our team there's got a lot of knowledge. We work with thousands of boosters every year, so we're happy to share that and see if we can help you out.